In this episode, we bring on Jacob Hess, a friend of mine, staff writer for the Deseret News. We're talking about old media versus new media, or as Jacob would say, what is the synergy here between the two of these things? How do they work together? What is the benefit of having both a legacy type of media and a new alternative media? Where are things going, and can these old and new medias work together? Now, this episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel. I am the official spokesman for Go and Do Travel, and I want to talk specifically about the Journey of Wisdom cruise. This cruise goes throughout Greece. We hit the Isles of Greece, including Patmos, where John the Revelator received his revelations. We go to Turkey and Ephesus, where Paul taught, and John apparently took care of the mother of Jesus, Mary. And then we also go to Cairo and Memphis, Egypt, where Abraham and Joseph of Egypt and Moses all lived. 3 different continents, one cruise, focusing on the wisdom of the gospel of Jesus Christ versus, well, the philosophies of men. Journey of Wisdom is September 12th through 24th, 2025. That's September 12th through 24th, 2025. Go to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com. Go to trips and events at the top and scroll down to Journey of Wisdom. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back my friend Jacob Hess from the Deseret News. Jacob, how are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, Greg. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. Hey, speaking of Christmas, before we get started, we're going to talk about the difference between legacy, traditional media, and new media. But before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit about what's going on with your family and a card game that you have. Maybe a good idea for Christmas.
Thanks, Greg. So we have a daughter who has had some issues with seizures since she was born in March. It's been a kind of a long medical journey. I decided it would be good to finish off this game I've been working on for a couple of years to help us cover some of the medical bills that have been a little hard. So this is the game. Train your puppy. So I've taught meditation classes, mindfulness classes to people who are stressed out of their minds, teenagers and adults. And people always ask, well, how do you help kids? How do you help younger children? You know, there are a lot of children dealing with anxiety, depression, anger issues. So what the game does is everybody brings a stuffed animal to the game. And then you have, you've got puppies with all the different emotions. And they take turns drawing the cards. And then the game kind of leads the family through a discussion that starts with the puppy, like, okay, if your puppy's anxious or scared, what are you going to do? Show us with your stuffed animal. And I give some guidance to parents or grandparents to say things like, would you get mad at your scared puppy? Would you yell at it? Would you try to force your puppy to not be scared? And kids are like, no, that would be dumb. So then the next thing becomes, well, what about when you're scared? What do you do? And over you move from puppy to person. And eventually kids and hopefully even adults start to realize if we can be compassionate, patient, and tender in training a puppy dog, we can do the same thing with our minds. I find a lot of people are just kind of victims, you know, tyrannized by their minds, like there's nothing I can do. But the truth is that if we work with our minds in patient, gentle ways, we can move them in a better direction. So that's the purpose of the game.
Awesome.
And yeah, thanks for letting me share it a little bit.
Okay, and this is something that will help you out. I know you guys have got some medical bills and other things that have been going on with that. So what we'll do is we'll put the link to the game in the description box so that people can go there and grab that. Maybe it's a good Christmas present, and maybe it's just something good to have. Right?
That'd be great. Oh, I forgot to mention there's a 42-page parent guide that I've just put a lot of good tips and stuff.
Okay.
For how to bring more stillness and silence into your home. And yeah, I appreciate the chance to share it.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So let's get into this here. We're talking about legacy. Is legacy now, is that a pejorative for the media? If I say legacy media or mainstream media, or what traditional, would you prefer traditional?
It doesn't matter to me. I don't even know where that word legacy came from, but yeah, it is such an interesting moment. I think this is a perfect place to have this conversation.
So looking at things right now, the sourcing of news is changing very, very quickly. I believe that last year there was a Pew Research poll that went out that said they're down. Looking at the nightly news, that's what everybody used to do. You went all the way back to like Walter Cronkite, right? You used to have about 15 million people a night in the U.S. that would watch the news, the nightly news, and this was in the 80s. We're now down to 7 million. Even though we're much, much larger as a country. And so the traditional sources that we've seen in the past are really changing quite a bit. And of course, we see this with print media as well, right? And not just print media, but I would say what print media has evolved to, which is digital media. Mm-hmm. There's still a breaking away from that into other sources of news. How do you see this happening right now, and where do you think it's going to go?
Can you say that first number again? How many used to watch?
So 15 million in the 80s.
And so it's cut in half, you're saying.
And now, yeah, it's about cut in half right now, regardless of having, what are we at now, 40 years of growth in the United States.
Well, there's like there's a positive spin on this because I know that in traditional media, you'll hear sort of a lot of hand wringing, lamenting, but a more optimistic spin is people are thinking for themselves. They're asking questions for themselves. They're no longer just saying, what does this expert say? What does the science say? What does the doctor say? What does the news broadcaster say? They're saying, that never made sense to me, or I felt unsettled about that. And some of the non-traditional media deserve some credit for that, however vilified they can be as a whole. Like, how dare people trust those voices, right? Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes those voices have been the only places that people have heard questions about the status quo. And issues all the way back to the pandemic, to stuff internationally, to domestic politics. I think alternative media, I don't know what terms you prefer, have played an important role in trying to foster some critical thinking, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of just, what do the experts say? What do the truth tellers say? Well, what if the truth tellers start to feel funny to us? What if they're like off? Then it seems a good thing that people are asking their own questions.
Well, it seems to me also that when you look at, like a traditional media, what happens is you start getting a fomenting of a specific, there's this, anything that starts to solidify over time ends up in a little bit of a monolith, right? It ends up with, who are we going to hire? They're going to be more people like us. They're going to think like us. There's an expectation of how we're going to produce this and deliver this information. Who is our audience? Perhaps some agenda that is thrown in there and mixed in with that. And so I think that there's a new media, to me, with alternative media, the way I would look at it is it's a disruption. It's a disruption of that fomenting of a narrative. Mm-hmm. That is a natural process. That is a natural process in anything. Yeah. To kind of solidify something where you're bringing in more and more like-minded individuals.
Tell me what you think about this, Greg, because I like that phrase, new media, old media, alternative. It's positioned as sort of like in opposition, and those are the big categories, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder if the better categorization goes something like this. I between new and old media, legacy media, alternative media, I find across both camps people that strike me as really seeking for truth, like genuine. Like there are traditional voices at the New York Times. I don't always agree with them, but I always want to hear what they have to say because I've come to trust them. Even, you know, I know CNN gets beat up a lot. They were the first one on the ground there in Syria after the Assad regime fell. And so I find like certain voices are like, wow, I really trust that person to give it to me straight, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are voices in alternative media that similarly they seem to be seeking for truth. And on both sides, there are others that you're like, they're pushing something here that doesn't quite feel right? I'm kind of suggesting maybe a spectrum on the degree to which either side is really seeking for truth. It's been eye-opening over the last year working at Deseret News to see how focused my editors are on making sure we're saying things that are only factual, right? How do we know that's true? We've got to back that up. If we can't, I mean, it is intense, and I really appreciated that. And that's the kind of thing that you don't always see. If you can string together a narrative that your audience is going to like with enough tidbits that make it feel factual, then you put it out there, right?
Do you think, I agree with that. I mean, I certainly think that's true. I think, but I would push back a little bit. And one place I would push back in is trust, because there is a declining level of trust in the media right now, quite a bit actually. In fact, I'll search for it here in a minute, but I think I've got the numbers on that. But it's decreased quite a bit, and I think that there's a couple things that we would look at. Number one, I think people do start to realize that there is kind of a narrative, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong all the time. That doesn't mean it's evil or bad or anything else. It's just a little maybe myopic, right? In some ways, and people so therefore are going to say, well, I don't trust this. You're going down these certain guidelines here within these guidelines, and you don't want to step out of that.
Yeah.
On the other side, I think that again, that idea of disruption comes into play, where you have all of these, call it information guerrilla warfare a little bit, right? And I know you're trying to keep me away from putting the two sides against each other, but it's kind of like, okay, we're going to poke a little bit here and there. We're going to poke a little bit here and there, and we're finding problems with what is being stated. And so you kind of have a check, right? Because that's still the way it is, right? I mean, traditional media still runs everything. The stories are broken through traditional media. Everybody is reacting to what is going on from the AP and the New York Times, et cetera, right? And so, but there's more of a pushback and there's more checking on these things.
Yeah.
Why do you think there is a lack of trust in the media right now? What has caused that? Is that simply technology and additional sources and different views on these things? Or is it because there was more of a narrative going on?
What a great question. I think we're not too far apart on this. Too bad. We could really go at it if we were. I'll have to come up with something else. But I think about a relationship with a friend or family member where you've lost trust, right? Mm-hmm. If we bring it back down to that, it's usually when there's a certain expectation. Okay, I really needed you to be there for me in this, or I was hoping to have your love and you weren't there. Mm-hmm. You let me down or you betrayed me. I think it's fair to say there's a sense among viewers, readers, listeners of feeling betrayed. In the last maybe 2 decades, I think you're right. Like you were supposed to give it to me straight. You were supposed to just tell me the truth. But there was something else going on, you know? There's something else going on. And now I'm not so sure. And I also think we're also in agreement, Greg, that it's actually impossible to come from a place of total neutrality, right? Every one of us, every single platform, every single content creator has a particular standpoint, a particular bias. I think the problem comes when that's not acknowledged and when it shapes the story that's being told in a way that I think you said it well. Like, there's certain parameters in which I'm not going to step outside of, even if the truth points outside of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think the trust can be broken. Anytime people feel like you're pushing something, you're selling something, you're defending something, and unwilling to ask certain questions, unwilling to pursue the truth, nothing but the truth, I think people get disappointed by that.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I was looking at talk about sourcing. I get most of my news from X, and when I say X, I don't mean what they put down on the sidebar and what they're putting out there for me to look. I mean, I look at that. I might look at that here and there. It's because of the people that I follow. Right. It's the organizations that I follow. It's the individuals. And I'm running through there. I am going to pick up most of my news from taking 30 minutes to run through my X feed and that I've built. Right. So, and I'm going to see what's going on and what is interesting to me. Right.
That you've built, by the way, by picking certain people that you trust, right? Like, these are voices I want to follow. I imagine there might be some people you've picked that you don't trust that you just want to follow anyway.
Yeah. Or that I don't trust or that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
There are several people that, I'll give you an example. I am one of the sources I go to is the Atlantic. Right. If I'm looking for a good piece to read on something, I'm going to go to the Atlantic, even though I probably am not going to agree oftentimes with what they're writing. Mm-hmm. Because to me, the writers there are usually going to be intelligent. They're going to do their background. They're not just knee-jerk reactions. I may not agree with that, but now I'm going to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's great.
On the issue, right? I want that source, right? But what you're saying there is, or what I'm getting back to is, I can go on to Facebook or I can go on to YouTube or anything else, any of the other social media platforms outside of X, and I'm going to get oftentimes a little check down below a topic that's going to tell me a little bit about, well, this topic is on, whether it's abortion or it's the masks or it's whatever else, right? There's going to be a little something down there, and it's always on one side. It's always on one side. But if I go to X, it's almost always on the other side now.
Yeah. Right.
So you've got this, there's this new, it's interesting because you've got this narrative out there that's going to be given, even in social media, where you've got this bringing together of all of this information together. There is a siphoning of an agenda to me that still comes around, right? And so that makes it difficult. I went to ChatGPT before our interview here, just to ask a couple of questions, and it's the same thing. It's going to give me its angle. Because I went to Grok, which is on X, and it gave me a very different angle.
So, okay, can I suggest one more positive spin to this?
Sure.
If we're living in a world where we're all just waiting for someone else to tell us what is true, it's easy to get lazy, right? And I think there could be something positive in that people are they're being forced to wrestle inside themselves with, how do I really know it's true? Even the visual evidence now. I had somebody the other day say, I don't trust what I see because of AI.
Yeah.
I see a video. Even that used to be the gold standard is now like, how do I even know that that's real, right? maybe now bringing the faith angle into this, maybe that pushes people to kind of, how do we know? How can I know something for sure? And of course, from a spiritual perspective, you and I have common cause in saying there is a particular way we can know through spiritual means, through peace, through joy, through confirmation directly from God, what is true, right? And we can even go beyond that and say, from our shared faith tradition, wherever truth exists, that's our religion, according to Brigham Young.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to be scared if it's coming from one source or the other, right? You mentioned the Atlantic, some people can be horrified. You still read that or this? And it's like, wherever truth exists, we can welcome it, right? And that's where the war between different media sources doesn't necessarily have to happen. We can appreciate good and truth wherever it's come from, and we can also be discerning when we're being led along by someone who may not be out for the full truth.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's almost like an evolution of discernment that is required, especially in the West, right? Where you're getting bombarded with all of this information. How do you've got to up your game, right? You have to up your game, or because if you're going to be plugged into things, there's an awful lot of propaganda. There's an awful lot of narrative, and there's just a lot of information coming through. What are you going to think about this? Why do you think this? You really do have to think for yourself.
And that's a welcome question. I mean, that's a rich conversation, and that's an ancient conversation, right? That's a conversation that, as believers, we love to have that conversation. And Greg, I think that's something people have appreciated about you, by the way, backtracking a bit. You've been able to ask certain questions, right? That are challenging. You've tried to do it in a way that is respectful, but that is something I think we should be appreciative of non-traditional or new media sources. They've been willing to ask questions others are not asking. Mm-hmm. And legacy traditional media probably should have been doing that, right? So
you get comfortable.
And I think that conversation about what is true and how do we know what's true is something that we have some things to offer people, because truth, Joseph Smith said, truth tastes good. It actually feels different than deception, right? I was on this project with Michael Peterson last year. He did all this research on kind of what led up to this thing called the CES letter. And one of the common experiences for people when they read the CES letter was nausea, feeling horror, feeling anger, all of a sudden questioning these things that they used to rely on, right? From a spiritual lens, no matter what you've read, if you're feeling anger, disgust, nausea, newfound hatred over something you're reading, you got to ask that question. Is this really something I should be trusting? This story or this angle or this source of news?
Yeah, I think, again, I mean, going back to the idea of discernment, how are you going to discern? Now, here's another problem, though. And that is, I talk about I'm losing the word here that I'm looking and trying to pull in, aggregating all my news onto X, right? So I've got all these things, but it's still my choice, right? So a lot of what's been brought up before, I think it was Jonathan Haidt that talked about creating silos of information. And so you're all of a sudden, if you're not careful, right? If I want to push the Atlantic out, right? If I want to, all of a sudden, all I'm doing is creating a feedback loop.
Yeah.
Right. They're preaching to the choir. I'm preaching back. We all feel good about ourselves. I'm supported in my thoughts. They support me in my thoughts, and we can be a collective of one.
Yeah. Although it doesn't seem like you're doing that, it sounds like it would be the equivalent of saying, my favorite thing is donuts. I'm just going to eat donuts all the time. But you're you're saying, hey, I don't agree with the Atlantic, but they stretch my mind. I'm going to listen, right?
Yes.
I think that's really healthy. And I'm glad you're raising the caution. The caution being, I'm going to follow whoever agrees with me, whoever thinks like me, whoever doesn't challenge or stretch me. And Facebook feeds are the same way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna snip off friends that disagree with my politics or my faith, and that's really sad. And there is evidence, I think, coming out of University of Colorado that doing so, unsurprisingly, makes you more polarized, right? Or we could even use the word radicalized, frankly.
Sure.
Like take your pet soapbox or mine or whoever's. I'm only going to listen to this kind of person. Pretty soon, you know, you just follow this. You know. So I'm glad you raised that caution. And I would also add, I had a professor at BYU, Rich Williams. He taught us that who we trust, the decision of who we trust to listen to, will shape all of our future. And so, like on a higher meta philosophical level, this is a weighty question. And it's interesting that we come down on different, we reach different conclusions about this. You and your neighbor, you and your wife, she probably listens and trusts some people that you may, and there's probably a pretty good overlap between Greg and his wife. But if you trusted different people 10 years ago to give you the truth, you'd probably be a different person today. Don't you think?
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a very big point. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what faith is. I mean, you break it down into a religious context. To me, trust is faith. It's the exact same thing. And so if I'm going to have faith in something or someone, or whether it's God or a person, that's what I'm going to lean toward.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what I'm going to go toward. And so you better be careful what you're leaning toward.
Well, even just the beginning of our day, do we actually trust enough to push back on all this stuff and just say, I'm going to kneel before someone that I regard as having more intelligence than me. And then I'm going to open this book that doesn't have any pictures and that speaks from thousands of years ago. And I'm going to spend time trying to hear a wisdom outside of myself, right? Mm-hmm. I'm increasingly convinced, Greg, that alone is a radical act. Just acknowledging that there is a higher power who has something to teach you and a way to guide you. It's becoming a lot more common, as you know, and you've been vocal about this. What's your truth, Greg? You don't need to listen to anybody else. You have everything you need.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it starts to break down community in really fundamental ways when all we need is our own truth. And forget about scripture or prayer or even books or our parents or something like that. So yeah. I'm a community psychologist, so I think there's strength in those community connections. Accountability, right? If we get off track, somebody can kind of help us. Almost every time you have a tragedy like this shooting in New York, almost every time the person has been isolated. They've been stewing in their juices and in a way that radicalizes them to the point of doing something terrible. So there's value in those community connections.
So when you say community, though, I mean, that matters too, right? I mean, what is the community that you're creating around you? I mean, whether it's news and people on social media that I'm putting around me, I can be creating something very tribal, which is the more default natural thing to do. And it's not just politics, right? It's I'm LDS. I'm going to have other Latter-day Saints that are around me all the time. I'm going to have people that are my age. Maybe it's more men. Maybe it's, regardless. I'm creating a community, and that's not all bad, is it? I mean, am I?
Not at all. In fact, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because this is another misconception that social media has introduced. We have hundreds and thousands of friends, but there is an anthropologist named Dunbar. His first name has escaped me. He studied human communities, Greg, and he came up with what he called Dunbar's number. He said, human beings can only have so many stable, intact relationships. We can't have thousands. Mm-hmm. And he actually broke it down. He broke it down. If you look it up, there's like, most of us have 5 really close friends. For most of us, the best friend category, you can't have like 50 super close friends. You got 5. And then you got 10 other people around that are maybe one step removed from best friend, but are really close. And you kind of move out. Mm-hmm. And it actually reinforces the point you just made, because if we only have so much time and capacity, at least in our mortal finite state, right? We better choose wisely. Like, who are you going to pour your love and your attention into? Who are you going to live life with? And if someone is pouring negativity and doubt and certainly hostility, kind of making different choices. I agree that it's not a clean distinction between just what media are we taking in and what people. For people with depression, this is one thing we've recommended, and also people struggling with pornography addiction. Very thoughtfully curate the people around you, your community, so that they're going to help you find either freedom from addiction or the happiness you're seeking, right? The peace.
Doesn't that go along with how you're choosing your news too? It's the same thing. I think I've probably got 5 sources I really trust and I really like. And I go beyond that, then it starts to water down just a little bit. It's like, yeah, maybe not. But usually there's some that I have a lot more trust in, and that I'm and that are thoughtful. And that's the other thing I notice about news is, something like The Atlantic, or something like, an editorial piece, or something that has been where there's been time taken to write it and to think through it. That is better news to me, right? I want to think through the process. I want to understand the issues. I want to be absorbed in it a little bit and see the context of these things once it's stewed a little bit. Mm-hmm. And to just have a straight reaction. I just did an episode on, there was a viral picture of Muslims that are bowing down in prayer in a Relief Society room in a chapel, right? In a Latter-day Saint chapel. And the response on this is all over the place, right? On the spectrum, all the way from this is wonderful and love and Christ-like to what in the world are we doing? This makes no sense. And, it's all over the place. But to me, I think there's you could have a very easy knee-jerk reaction to this without stopping and really stewing on it and trying to think through it. And maybe it won't change anything for you, but a lot of news is get it out now, be first, get all the likes and the retweets and everything else on there first. And so it's very, it's oftentimes very reactive.
I agree with you. We would all benefit from not just spouting whatever comes to mind, like I have something to say. There's one other angle I wanted to bring up before we were out of time. And maybe it's, if I can frame it as another thing that people of faith have to offer in this conversation. So much of the news that comes out there has sort of a tinge of culture war, like we're at war. And in addition to being optimistic about being truth and goodness being in different places, it seems to me followers of Christ, especially, in this conversation about what is true, we can also be a voice that says we don't have to be at war over this. Whether it's different positions about how to heal the body, different perspectives on what America needs. And yes, there are people that care about America on both sides of the spectrum. And we can say, like, what if we assume for a moment that both sides are well-intentioned, both sides are really caring about the goodness of humanity? Then we can learn from different perspectives. we've had an experience recently of getting help for our daughter at Primary Children's. And, we have the same questions and wonderings like many people. He closed the door. We have the same questions as many people about putting our daughter on these pretty heavy duty medications for her seizures. But the people that we've worked with at Primary have been so wonderful and so kind and helpful, and the medications have made a difference. And even with seizures, there's kind of warfare going on, attacks and like this and that. And I've become newly convinced that God doesn't want us to go to war over these things. Like we lose out if we start to believe that other side hates us. That other side on whatever issue is disgusting. That other side just wants the destruction of America, or that other side actually wants to keep us sick, or that other side only cares about money. We see that even in discussions about the church, right? It's like these silly conversations that happen where, they only care about money or power or control, and it's actually just a cartoonish sort of thing. Most people that I run into, even my two Marxist friends that that are dear friends to me, I don't agree with them, but they have so much goodness, and you get what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
No, I get it. I mean, it's well, a couple things there. I think first of all, there's a level of charity there that is an important principle that needs to be put out there. And maybe charity works with knowledge. Maybe charity works with gaining knowledge in that sense. If we're framing it this way, it's like, well, wait a minute here. I need to look, how do I, there's opposition in all things, but that doesn't mean I'm looking at what I'm opposed to and fighting it necessarily. Maybe, but maybe what I'm doing is I'm looking at all the opposition and I'm taking it all in and I'm discerning.
Yeah.
Right. I can grab all of this. I mean, you were talking about health. Well, you've got a lot of issues. You've got, what is it? MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. You got this whole new movement on RFKJ. Am I saying that right? And it's like, okay, well, maybe there's some truth there. Maybe there's some truth over here. And maybe I can pull these things in. And now I've got context. Maybe now I can look at this in a way where maybe there's some synergy in all of this.
I love that you brought the charity angle in, because that does seem to be the opposite of how we've sometimes been socialized to view things. I run into people a lot, including fellow believers, who kind of approach everything they hear with deep suspicion. Like, no. There's a secret agenda here. And I, the Book of Mormon talks about secret combinations. Latter-day Saints ought to be very clear that this isn't make-believe. There really is such a thing. But there's a difference for me between being aware of that and looking at everything with sort of a lens of there's something deeper going on. And if you would indulge, I actually think that mentality is more exciting than reality. What I'm saying is, if I'm on the inside secret, if I'm a part of the group that knows the truth, right? That nobody else really knows. Everybody else is deceived, but I know the inside. It's kind of exciting. It's like you're part of an inside club. But sometimes the truth is not so malevolent. Sometimes I think the full truth means really good people just disagree. And they actually don't want the downfall of the Republic or of Christianity, right? I think sometimes it's a lot more simple, but we're not excited by that. And if I could say one more thing, I do have a worry, and I'd like to write about this next year, that if we get too much into the drama of sort of the villain stories and the Illuminati are out to get us all, the plain precious truths of the gospel and of faith and of following Christ get boring. You open that and you're like, repentance, yielding my heart, serving my neighbor, boring. I mean, the republic is trembling. We've got to like rally against the elites. You know what I mean? I've got a good friend. I'm not going to say his name. Who every time I see him, he's telling me about another podcast that's telling him something. And I swear, like, I could either listen to those podcasts or spend time with the Word of God. I don't have time for both.
Yeah.
And I think you get what I'm saying. Like, we can get so fired up about that then you open Scripture and you might just not be able to get it and to hear the voice of God anymore, which, by the way, is more exciting than the voice of any influencer out there. The living God speaking to Greg and Jacob and telling us what we need to know, that is more exciting than Tucker Carlson or Russell Brand or anyone.
More than Russell Brand? I don't know. He's pretty interesting. No, I think the other thing is, I think on that, just to end here, I do think there is a knowledge. I mean, that whole Book of Mormon is a warning, right, of how a civilization falls apart. We need to keep that in mind. But at least I think in our day and age, I think you need to separate what we might look at as bad actors, right? And maybe there's a much smaller group of those than we might think. And secondarily, what we might look at as entropy, right, in a system or in an industry, or it's like, well, yeah, there probably needs to be some corrections here. There needs to be some things that we need to look at and make some changes, right? That's what I try to do. It's like, okay, there's problems here. There could be a bad actor. It's possible, but what has brought us to this point? Why is this? Why is insulin so expensive? Whatever it is.
No, you're right. And neither of us are advocating for this naivety that's just like, sure, come on in. You're selling this deal that's too good to be true, or you're going to dupe me. There's a reason that we sometimes get duped too much as people of faith, right? And my bet is we'll be better at that discernment, at be able to recognize the bad actors if we have a free flow of conversation between people who disagree, but don't demonize each other for it, right? Okay, like it just seems to me we're more vulnerable to being deceived and led down a path if it becomes siloed. Then people can take advantage. But if we're hearing from different sources, if your X feed was just, here are all the people that think like Greg, I think you'd be more easily kind of led down a path. The fact that you've curated a ideologically diverse news feed, and of course that includes the Deseret News. I know you're faithful.
Absolutely.
That you get what I'm saying? There's more opportunity for corrective if we allow ourselves to be challenged. I have an Episcopalian friend. He says he goes to church to be uncomfortable. Because if he stayed home and just stayed in his own thoughts about the Bible, about God, he'd just be very comfy, cozy. But he goes to church and encounters people that don't have his same politics or views, and it stretches him. And I appreciate how you try to listen to lots of people, Greg, including some of my wild ideas. And I think you're advocating that as important, and it needs to be happening on campus. It needs to be happening in newsrooms. John Haidt, when I interviewed John Haidt 2 years ago, he said our truth-seeking institutions have failed us. That's where this distrust has come from. My hope is that the beauty at the heart of journalism and at the heart of universities cannot just be recovered, but we can restore it, like there's something beautiful there that we can't let go of. We can't just say, universities are a waste. Journalism is a waste. The court system is a waste. These institutions have been there for a reason, and I feel like you've been a voice for reform, right? Like let's do this right. Let's do it in a way that people can trust again.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, Jacob Hess from the Deseret News, staff writer. Check out his stuff there at deseretnews.com. One more time, hold up that game. You have that?
I'll include the link. I'll include the Train your puppy.
Train your puppy.
Yeah.
Good Christmas gift and just gift period. So, all right, Jacob, appreciate your time so much.
Thank you, Greg.